According to
I'd like to call the January 4th meeting of the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission to order. Can we have our announcements, please?
Before we begin the agenda, the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to this public hearing. Copies of the agenda for today's meeting, the public hearing procedure, and Planning Department staff reports on all agenda items are available on the counter in the lobby of this conference room. The Planning Commission's bylaws limit the applicant on a zoning or subdivision application and his or her representative to a total of 10 minutes of speaking time at the start of the hearing on that item, plus up to 2 minutes at the conclusion of that hearing. All other persons wishing to speak on agenda items are limited to 3 minutes per person. However, if they feel that it is needed and justified, the Commission may extend these times by a majority vote. All speakers are requested to state his or her name and address for the record when beginning to speak. When you are finished speaking, please write your name, address, and the case number on the sheet provided in the lobby. This will enable staff to notify you if there are any additional proceedings concerning that item. Please note that all written and visual materials you present to the Commission will be retained by the Secretary as part of the official record. If you are not speaking, but you wish to be notified about future proceedings on a particular case, please sign in on that same sheet. The Planning Commission is interested in hearing the views of all persons who wish to express themselves on the agenda items. However, we ask that all speakers please be as concise as possible and avoid long repetitions of facts or opinions which have already been stated. For your information, the Wichita City Council has adopted a policy for all city zoning items. A copy of this policy is available in the lobby. The City Council relies on a written record of the Planning Commission hearings and does not conduct their own additional public hearings on these items.
Okay. We have no minutes to approve, so we'll go right on to the Subdivision Committee's recommendations. 2-1, case number 41, final plat. Do we have anyone on the Commission who'd like to hear that? Do we have anyone in the audience that would like to hear that? Seeing none, we'll take that by consent. 2-2, item 50, final plat, Auburn Lakes Edition. Anybody would like to hear that on the council? Mr. Green? We will hear that one. Let's go ahead, and we have no vacation items, so can we have a motion on 2-1?
move to approve.
Second.
Green. Josh? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I'd like to welcome everybody back and Happy New Year. We have a unanimous attendance today, which is wonderful. Okay. Neil?
Neil Straw, planning staff. Item 2-2 is the Auburn Lakes Edition. This is an 85-acre property. It's located north of Kellogg on the east side of 135th Street West. The plat proposes 146 lots. It is scheduled to be annexed this month, and that will convert the SF5 zoning to, it will convert the zoning to SF5. With the exception of the southernmost portion of the plat, which is currently zoned GC, and that will be downzoned at a later time. The applicant proposes a zero lot line development for the site. This would allow a house to be built on the property line with a 6-foot separation between the house on the adjoining lot. We do have Auburn Hills Golf Course that abuts the plat to the north. The Parks Department met with the plat's engineers, and the Parks Department didn't speak last week about flooding of the golf course in the past and their concerns of runoff from future developments in the area. The city stormwater engineer last week explained the drainage plan for this site would need to meet the stormwater design manual, and that means the post-development peak runoff rate needs to be equal or less than the current conditions. There were some questions last week at the subdivision committee that arose as to whether the subdivision committee or planning commission could require more than the standard to address the golf course's concerns. However, city law has confirmed that that is outside of the planning commission's authority because per city ordinances, the stormwater design manual is administered by Public Works, and the director of the Public Works was the only person that could be able to make those changes, not the planning commission. There were also some concerns last week brought up by the subdivision committee regarding side lot drainage, and the stormwater engineer explained that would be addressed prior to the issuance of building permits through the lot grading plans. Subsequent to the subdivision meeting last week, the drainage plan, which is item D, has been approved by stormwater management, and according to that drainage report, the stormwater runoff rate post-development is slightly less than the pre-development, as the stormwater engineer explained to me. There were waivers from the subdivision regulations needed for this plat. They included item R, a rear yard setback from 20 feet to 11.5 feet. Item S, lot width to depth ratio. Item T, lot width reduced from 50 to 48 feet. Item W, side setback reduced from 10 feet to 6 feet. And the subdivision committee did recommend these waivers be approved. At last week's meeting, MKC, their agent explained this development would be similar to the developer's other zero lot line developments, which includes courtyards at Auburn Hills, which is at Kellogg on 135th across to the west, and the Estancia addition, which is at 37th and Ridge. And for this development, for the house located on the lot line, there would be a firewall, and the house on the adjoining lot would have a standard wall with window openings. And he also mentioned that access to the structures by fire department would actually be improved with this type of development due to the absence of fences between the lots. The subdivision committee had several concerns regarding the 6-foot separation between the structures, particularly since each house would be allowed a 2-foot roof overhang. And subsequent to the subdivision meeting, I did speak with City Fire, and it turns out the applicable code regulations for the zero lot line dwellings are not contained in the fire code, but the building code. The fire resistive construction chapter in the building code is what regulates these type of structures. I also spoke with Courtney Capello, the assistant director of MAPC, and he confirmed that with these type of structures, since they are 6 feet apart, they would require a 1-hour fire resistance on the underside of the roof overhangs. That would be on both lots. Last week, the subdivision committee did recommend the plat to be approved by a vote of 5-1. And we have representatives here today from City Fire, MABCD, and Stormwater, if there's any questions. Questions for staff?
Any questions for staff?
I've got one on, for fire, for the closeness and for access for the fire department to get to different places on the property for the fire protection. Are they satisfied that other things are okay then?
It comes down to the fact, Chief Bevis with the Fire Department, Fire Marshal. The zero lot line is allowed by the International Residential Code, and so that's what's allowed in our community, as long as they meet those requirements that Neil pointed out, that the one that's on the lot line has to have the 1 hour rating, and the openings have to be rated, or they have to be put in a different location. Those are the things that are required by the code, and that's what we can go to. Yeah, 72 inches between buildings isn't always ideal, but in most cases, we're going to make that work. You know, if we have a house fire, it doesn't matter whether it's 10 feet or 6 feet, we have a problem with exposures in Kansas winds. So, but most houses don't have the 1 hour firewall, so we have that going for us, that we do have that resistance factor.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I've got a question, sorry. I had to wait to be called.
You just waited until I got back to the chair.
How far would you have been if I hadn't? No, so the one wall that's on the zero lot line has the 1 hour firewall. Why doesn't the one that's 6 feet away have the same 1 hour firewall?
Because it's
They're
meeting the
still the same
regulations.
distance apart.
And I'm talking out of my code, that's actually Courtney's area, but because normally they're both 6 feet off, right? Only one of them is breaking that rule, and that's what the code requires. IRC requires that one that's on the property line to have the 1 hour. It does not require it for the one that's still the 5 or 6 feet off of the property line. That's how the code's written.
But knowing that that wall is still just 6 feet away, I don't understand why the zero lot would need the 1 hour if the one that's 6 feet away doesn't need the 1 hour.
You'd have to ask the ICC that. And not even Courtney, because he didn't write it either. But no, I mean, it really is the fact that normally you don't have any kind of fire separation, it's just space. And in this instance, you're giving up space on one side, and instead of space, you're getting a resistance factor that you don't normally have. That's why. The other one's still 6 feet away, and from the property line, it's still falling within guidelines. But with the one who isn't, then it has to have the 1 hour.
To
It
warn.
goes one way.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Yeah.
But you have that space on the other one, and that's the thing, you know, space, time, shielding. In this case, we have space 6 feet on one side, and on this side, we have shielding with fire-rated rock or whatever the case is. Yes, sir.
Situations like this where there's additional requirements because of fire code, do our regular inspectors inspect that, or does the fire department come down and inspect to make sure that they're
It's all part of the building code. It's all part of the residential process. As the fire department doesn't do any final inspections on any kind of buildings except for alarms and sprinklers. That's all handled through MAPCD. But yeah, it is part of their requirements, and they look to make sure it has the fire ratings because that's down through their process.
Thank you.
Is the wall on the property line or the overhang?
Both. I'm sorry. I thought you were meaning which ones are fire resistant. The overhang is actually going over the property line, if I recall correctly, doesn't it? Yeah, it can overhang. I think I don't know if Courtney distributed these or not. He had some paperwork, a little chart from the IRC, but it actually overhang like over 2 foot over the line, 2 or 3 foot over the property line, and that's allowed by the International Residential Code.
Any other questions for staff? Mr. Foster?
I think these are for Neil mainly, and perhaps stormwater.
Thank you.
Neil, condition D, it states post-development peak runoff rate to be equal or less than the current land use condition. Somehow less than does not seem like an appropriate standard. It could be 0. They could do nothing. I don't think that's very good terminology, especially, I wish everyone here on the commission could have seen the information that was provided by the Parks Department in regarding the concern for runoff here. Imagine a fairway that can take 6 feet of water depth. They shown very clearly that post-development activity around that golf course has increased the runoff onto the golf course and is causing deteriorating conditions and cost to the city for this. So I think this needs to be changed. That needs to be equal to the current land use condition and get rid of this terminology for less than. And again, that's more of a, I don't know if you can comment on that, Joe, but that would be my suggestion.
Okay, I'll be happy to. I'm Joe Hickle, City Stormwater Engineer. I live at 15708 East Linwood, Wichita, 67230. The manual for detention is stating that post-development shall not be more than pre-development. So the engineer's target is to understand what is the precondition runoff rate. Say that's 100 CFS. In his design, his or her design, they could do 100 as a discharge. Usually they're looking for something less. They may come up with 91, may have been the way the calculations worked out, and so it was less than existing conditions. It could be equal, but usually the target is, let's make it less than, not by a great amount because that might be a huge expense, but at least equal to or less than, not more than.
Okay, I'm with you on that. Second question is, at what point at this stage do we have a guarantee that they're going to meet the 1.5% side yard drainage? Is that specifically stated in the building code when they do the lot drainage?
That is not part of the drainage report that I've reviewed for the platting process. That comes later under the subdivision regulations and administered through MAPC through their grading inspection process. They can address that better than I can. But we certainly, because of your sensitivity to that, would want to check the grading plans as they come in for this development, that there is positive flow. Well,
There's a big difference between 1%, 1.5%, and 2%. 1%'s a joke, and that's what the sub-regs allow for for rear lot drainage, which doesn't work well at all. I just want to make sure that on these side yards, we get 1.5%, and I'd like that as a condition. Second one I want to look at, and this may be a fire one, is condition I. And on that one, it says it has approved site subject to emergency access easement for 135th Street West. The question on that is that emergency access easement, can that be a pedestrian easement as well?
The pedestrian use wouldn't really matter to us. The whole point of that emergency access easement is the fact that until this fully develops, we don't have the two separated entrances or access for the fire department because they have over 30 units in the property that we've talked about before in Sub D. So whether they make that usable by pedestrian, that would be up to another decision. For us, all it is going to be is going to be a gated access, or at least that's what my original belief was. They were going to make it gated. Maybe it's changed since we originally looked at it, but we just had to have another point of access to meet fire code.
So it would be possible to add a stipulation this could serve as a pedestrian easement as well.
It would not be against anything in our code, that's for sure.
Any other questions? John?
Neil or whoever can add to this. Is there anything in here about shrubbery on the person that actually is 6 feet away? Can they plant shrubbery along there? And I'm thinking mainly fire and access with other things.
There's nothing in the subdivision regulations to address that.
So if the 6-foot one plants cedar trees along there, which are flammable, then that decreases the width in there. I just wondered if that was thought about.
Mr. Green?
Yeah, I think this question would probably be for Mr. Hickle. On the drainage report that they provided, I know at our subdivision meeting last week, it was discussed that the lots that were going to be in the southern portion of this development, all of the lots that are in the floodplain were going to have 2 foot of freeboard, and the lots that were going to be in the southeastern portion were going to have 4 foot of freeboard. Was that included in the study that they provided to you, that your conclusion was that there was going to be less runoff?
Yeah, the report only basically addresses the amount of runoff because of the development, and it is less than existing condition. I think in some parts of the plat, there were different minimum pad elevations depending on the lot's proximity to a water body or a stream or where water can rise. The 4 foot that you mentioned, I'm not aware of.
But they'd mentioned that, because there was that discussion about, 2 foot between the base flood elevation and the minimum pad.
Right.
And that in the southeastern portion, it was lower in that area, and they were going to actually have 4 feet, I think, is what.
I would have to check that.
Yeah.
That might be because they're putting in maybe more fill in that area because
Right.
it was lower.
But that was factored into the runoff calculation.
Yes.
And then I guess we've got several plats, subdivisions in the community that are basically patio homes, the kinds of designs that these homes are going to be. And we've started to allow these zero lot line developments. And I think that's probably the third one that we've seen. Is there something that we as maybe the subdivision committee or the commission should take a look at and maybe address these issues rather than having every time that one of these developments comes in, we have to waive for example, the minimum lot width, the lot width to depth ratios, where we have the side yard setback that we have to waive to allow the zero lot, and then 6 foot on the other side. The rear lot development, the rear lot lines are being narrowed down. Are these things that instead of having to waive them all the time, is there some way that we can develop these into our development process?
That'd be a good topic for our commission workshop.
Yes, Mr. Richardson called earlier and asked us to schedule that, and so we're going to do that at the end of a subdivision meeting to try and address that and see where we need to go. But for example, like the side yard setbacks, you're not really waiving them. The subdivision regulations say whatever the plat is, that setback takes precedence over the zoning setback. And so in my mind, that's not a waiver, that's a decision you guys are making to approve or not approve. But the other things may well be like lot depth to width ratio may be waivers that would need to be addressed. Now, some of that may also come up with the work on the infill committee because they're going to be looking at whether or not we need to change some of the basic development standards to promote density and that sort of thing. But after talking to Mr. Richardson, our plan was to have folks come to subdivision and provide whatever information you need and then get direction from there.
Because, I don't have any concerns. I mean, I've got concerns. I think these developments are nice. I've been in there, in the properties, and they're very nice. I'm thinking about getting one ourselves, but I just, it seems like we are having to discuss and look at these things with a fine, with a fine eye, and making sure that everything is, all the T's are crossed, when I don't think are, simply because they are unique.
Mr. Hartman, and then we'll go to Ms.
Got a question for Neil. Neil, since these are on a zero lot line, is there any provision for a maintenance easement or something to
Yes.
allow the property owner to get access
Yes.
unit to maintain the exterior wall that's right on the property?
There's a 6-foot maintenance and access easement between the homes, yes.
Ms. Miller?
Dale, I was just wanting to request during that post-subdivision meeting, could we also have some input from fire department and some of that? Because that seems to be one of the issues that we always grapple about, is the fire safety issues and have concern about.
Yeah, they were definitely going to be invited.
Mr. Foster?
This is a question for Joe. John, condition AA, it references there was a correction in the platter's text, provided that no fill be placed within said drainage reserves. You know, perhaps there's a situation where he had to do a subtle fill for detention or something, but in the plan that you've seen, do they need to do any filling or work in those reserves to make the runoff numbers work?
I don't believe that level of detail was included in the report today. Because there's no grading plan, it's just calculating areas and runoffs for the development as it's being platted with streets and rooftops, et cetera.
You see a situation where this language may hinder what they want to do, or what they need to do to get
Yeah, I would
drainage
not. It would be more of getting appropriate floodplain fill permits through the state for the development if they're in proximity to the floodplain, and they are in some lots.
that would supersede then this statement.
Probably would, yes.
And just one final thought on EE, it references applicable city or county engineer and unobstructed to allow for the conveyance of stormwater. I would suggest adding in accordance with the stormwater design manual. Sounds like you just want to get the runoff away from the site, whereas I think it has to have a standard there per the stormwater design manual.
I would concur. That's a good idea.
Any other questions? I just had a quick question for Neil. Since we're granting a variance on the rear yard setback, would my errant golf ball have any restrictions?
You're an awful powerful hitter if you can get those houses in that golf.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
That's actually, the setbacks are actually established with the plat, so there's not really, I think like Dale said, it's not really a waiver anyway.
All right, do we have anyone from the owner applicant like to speak?
Good afternoon, Jason Gish with MKEC representing the applicant. I believe it sounds like most of the questions were answered for you, but I'd be glad to try to clarify anything or add to anything if you had more.
Maybe just your name and address be good.
Sorry, yeah, Jason Gish, MKEC, 411 North Webb Road.
Any questions? John?
Has it been considered about plantings, as I previously asked about, of particularly flammable plants between the residences on that 6-foot side?
Sure, I don't know that anybody's thought about it any differently in this kind of home design than they would in any other neighborhood, so I can't say that there's been any considerations for that.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Foster, and you'll be next.
Jason, I'd be curious your thoughts on item I about the emergency access. One of the concerns I had is we're allowing over 1,600 foot of distance, and you look in there for connectivity and pedestrian access, and you don't see good connection. to adjacent development, does it make sense to provide for pedestrian access in those emergency access easements?
For pedestrian access, and I don't think there's anything that prohibits a pedestrian from traveling through the emergency access, except for typically there's a vehicular gate, if you will. So that would be, I guess, the only thing is we're not opposed to it necessarily. There might be some concerns from our client. Let me just point to this. I don't know that there's any problem with, from this point right here, this emergency access out onto 135th, serving as a pedestrian way. It doesn't happen to be very far away, and I can appreciate your comments. I mean, this is less than ideal on connectivity, but it's kind of the remnant, or what you get when you have remnant land that hasn't been developed and there's development that's kind of around it. It starts to impact. But we did work with the commercial platter that you, on this development for the commercial piece that you recently have looked at. And that's why and through the fire department, we worked out a way to tie into an access point down here so that when this development gets to a phase, it gets kind of to here, we've talked to fire. Once we kind of get past this point, this emergency access becomes a critical tie-in point. I would be a little uncertain if we want to have everyday pedestrian access through there. I personally kind of like the idea if you're trying to get to a commercial area, but I don't, there's a lot of people that would be opposed to that idea, the way they think. And so I'll leave it at that, but I don't know if that adequately answers what you're after.
I don't think it hurts to add it to the condition and gives it flexibility should the homeowner see a need for it.
Any other questions? Wait a minute, I think I had Mr. Hartman first.
Jason, on these units, in the past, a lot of the zero lot lines had patios and openings on the side of the unit. Are these designed that way as well?
So this is a franchise type community, and Epcon, the company that designs the floor plans, they have what they call side courtyard plans and rear load courtyard plans. So if you go look in some of the existing subdivisions, you'll often find that some of the rear load courtyards that open up into larger viewing vistas like drainage ways. And so I could see homes that are back here, for instance, looking out into these reserves. There's a very good chance that those owners or buyers would select that rear focus plan. But oftentimes here, where you're a little closer to your neighbor, and keep in mind that the whole side courtyard, and the reason for the space and why they ask for that is because it really makes a difference on how that courtyard space feels and the privacy of it. So it's integral to their design and their concept. And so those side courtyard plans end up being a lot of time used on these internal blocks, if you will.
Back to the comment on pedestrian access, these are, in fact, as I understand it, public streets.
Yes.
So we're not restricting anybody in the world who can drive in there with a car. I'm not sure why we would be reluctant to restrict pedestrians, and if we're talking about safety or anything else. It just seems incongruous to me that if we're going to have public streets, that we should also allow pedestrian access wherever we can. I think someplace down the road we'll wish that we had, even though this is, not in the heart of the city. Someday it may well be. So that would be my comment on that.
If I might just respond, for instance, this 135th, our client specifically asked us to speak with planning and fire about this here being able to be gated, and I think it's more of from a homeowner standpoint, somewhat of a security thing, that we don't leave the back door open, so to speak. Like I said, I'm not opposed personally to having the pedestrian way there, but as it currently, what the client has asked us to do is work with planning and fire, and then you to request that we have a gate. So whether it's pedestrian or vehicular, we definitely want to be able to gate that emergency access point.
Okay.
Dale, if you got a gated community, you can't use public public funding for the streets and infrastructure, can you?
If it's a public street, you cannot gate it off so that the public can't drive through, yeah.
Let me make one other clarification. The south area here, that's south of this drainage way, that is the EPCON community with the 0 lot lines. This north area will be private streets, and those would be paid for privately, built to city standards. But that is looking, these 13 lots here will be a gated community. That's what it's proposed as.
It was discussed at the subdivision meeting that you were going to have 4 foot of freeboard.
So on the Calfskin Creek, kind of a general rule of thumb was, so let's start, the FEMA would require 1 foot above the base flood elevation. The city and county, I believe, take the 1 foot and add, say, another foot. And because of the size of this basin and what we've looked at, we typically go 3, but we're going to do 4. So that's where that comment came from. And that text of that minimum pad for these lots that are affected by this Calfskin Creek area, that is in the plat, listed as a minimum opening.
Does the paving adjacent to those houses, is that going to be also raised up to meet that, or
yeah, typically the streets do not. The streets generally though are above the 100-year.
Any other questions? Were these questions asked at subdivision?
A lot of them were
being somewhat repetitious.
But we didn't have answers for like the fire and the drainage. They just received the drainage plat. So they feel like they have the answers.
Okay, anybody from the audience like to speak on this matter? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission.
I move we approve subject to staff comments.
Second.
Moved by Mr. McKay, seconded by Mr. Bill Johnson. Any more discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Oh, Mr., retract that. You got to shout sometimes.
I'm requesting some clarifications to the conditions. One is to ensure the 1.5% side yard drainage, since it's not certain that that's going to be provided through the building code effort. The second would be in item I to expand that it would not only serve emergency access easement, but could be utilized as a pedestrian easement. And I think just those two.
Mr. McKay, would you accept those?
My motion was, it was presented by the staff. They want to be amended and make a substitute motion.
And I'd provide a substitute motion to add those 2 amendments to the conditions.
Second.
Green, second. Did you second the original? No. Oh, Mr. Johnson, okay. Okay, we'll take the substitute motion first. Any more discussion on it? Seeing none, all in favor of the substitute motion? Aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
I see a show of hands for the noes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It passes, 9 to 5? Okay, next item is, let me ask if anybody on the commission would like to hear item number 21710.
People in the audience.
Item 4. Anybody want to hear that one? Okay, we'll hear it. And who's making that presentation? Dave? Let me ask, item number 21755. Anybody on the commission like to hear that one? Anybody in the audience like to hear 55? Item 5. Seeing none, we'll take that by consent. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Aye.
Okay, Dave, take away number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dave Erup, planning staff. Case PD 2017-10 is the request of Central Community Church to rezone their property on the north side of Maple into the PD number 57, the Central Community Church Planned Unit Development. You can see some from our map, the location. The big ditch is roughly right here on the west side of the property. The church owns virtually all of this land, but we've outlined in blue the area that's the subject to this rezoning. That's an aerial of the property in question. You can see for the most part, this basically just is a big open field that is what is being proposed to be developed by this PUD. Shows the comprehensive plan identifying it as prime for new residential, but it's within the urban core area, the central area. And here's the site plan that was included in your staff report of what is actually being proposed. This property has been a plat submitted. The main item on the plat is the creation of what is now proposed to be a public street called Hope Street, coming in off of Maple and moving north into the property, roughly along the existing parking lot is over in this area, so we're more parking in this area of their parking lot around the church. The street will come north around the lake and then into the cul-de-sac, kind of the center of the property, and opening up into the land. There's really only 4 lots, 2 lots to the north that are primarily used for, as by this PUD, residential development of a mixture of uses. We'll talk about that in a second. The other lot, identified as Lot 3, that is west of the new street and covers the southwest portion of the property all the way to the west property line and south to Maple, is covered by a mixture of non-residential uses, a proposed event center that also is requested by the PUD to be able to have alcohol, and therefore, under the zoning laws, it becomes a nightclub in the city, and that's what it says. I know there's been a lot of publicity about the church creating a nightclub, and that's created a lot of community interest, but it's just the way the laws are structured in not only the city regulations, but it's also how the state manages those kind of licenses, that it becomes drinking establishments and things of that nature. They also have an outdoor amphitheater proposed immediately south of their event center. They would retain the pond for drainage purposes. And then on the far southwest portion of the property, right along the north side of Maple, is the location where they are proposing ultimately a school that provides all the way from kindergarten through high school. And then a large north area, north of that would be the area for the soccer field. That would be along the western portion of the property. The residential development to the north is intended to be an exclusive rental community, mixture of single-family homes, duplexes, other patterns, and also potentially some apartment property on the kind of the northeast quadrant of the property. That will be, and as was presented at the DAB meeting Tuesday night, they are pursuing housing tax credits through the state of Kansas through the Housing Resources Corp. And if that happens, there may be a mixture of rental units in here based on income levels, but this is not a low income issue. It's targeted primarily from what we understand to be aimed towards an elderly population, which anymore is 55 and above, which means I qualify. But it's targeted primarily to empty nesters. This is not assisted living. This is still independent living. It's just that we're dealing with units that are targeted toward folks who are not interested in mowing grass and shoveling snow and things of that nature. The language in the PUD, we've had a couple of issues raised with respect to what it is we want to see specifically in that language. Within your staff report, we've identified primarily 3 issues, 2 big ones that are at issue. One, they are requesting the monument signs and other signs that will occur in this project to be allowed to a maximum height of 25 feet. Per the sign code, our recommendation is 20. I think you'll get a presentation and an argument to try to ask that to be allowed to remain at 25 feet. The other one had to deal with the architectural control standards. There is language in your staff report that we have presented to you. Subsequent to that going out, we've had quite an extensive dialogue with the agent, and through that, the church committee. They've come back with alternative language, and it will be handed out a proposal of new language that would be for, I think, within the PUD, what we call condition or general provision 12. There's new language. You'll get a handout that in a second on what that is. Long story short, the DAB recommended approval unanimously as proposed. We are recommending approval of the PUD as presented with the modifications in the staff report, and will be supplemented in general provision here shortly regarding architectural controls. The issue with that was the church wanted to have their own architectural committee that would deal with those standards, and essentially punt that to them, let them make the decisions, and the city enforce that. And that's just not something that we do. The city does not enforce private covenants. So what they are presenting is language that kind of blends the two together in a fashion that we believe will be acceptable in how we're able to handle how development will occur. The big issue is that historically, and as you're well aware from past review of language in PUDs and in CUPs, when we talk about architectural standards, the primary theme has been consistency of what your development looks like. The vision that they have, and I don't know if you've seen any of the information that was presented in the paper, that was a rendering, an architectural rendering that was made available. They're envisioning that event center to be almost, if you will, like a big barn, perhaps even a nice red barn like you'd see out in the country with something that would be attractive. And they didn't want that to then set the tone for the entire development. So the language is going to be a little more flexible with respect to that. As I said, we're recommending approval through. Just going through the aerial photos, you can see this is, I'm sitting in the parking lot just north of Maple, looking kind of northwest across the open field, occupied presently by a bunch of geese that you can see. That's another shot, same way. We're looking west along Maple from that west entrance to the existing parking lot. You can see the existing sign for the church. That sign says Happy New Year, by the way. It's a little hard to read, but that's what it says. This is actually a shot from that general area looking back towards the existing church. There is quite a bit of construction going on around the church, but that's actually not in the property under consideration today. From a different perspective, looking at the existing church. Now we're on Maple, further to the west, looking due north. You can see the residential properties on the west side of the property at this location. That's further west, and here you see the what little bit of the existing wall around the subdivision to the west that happens there along the north side of Maple. That's looking a little further west, again north. The area looking here would be, if it's built, the school would be in this area. Right behind that would be where the soccer field is proposed. Again, I'm sitting in the parking lot. You see the edge of the church building existing, and that's looking virtually straight north to the area where we're talking about. That's looking east back towards downtown area along Maple. Another shot roughly the same way. Here we're looking in the parking lot south across Maple Street towards the development that exists on the south side of Maple Street, the development south of the property. So this is all the way to the west. That's, I think, Fairhaven is the street that comes into Maple, and this is, you can see the existing wall along the neighborhood. Our understanding is that the discussions that occurred with the residents in the neighborhood was that as this developed, that community primarily was saying they did not want a wall built around. They closed that all off. They want it to remain open. So that's why there's not a wall or other improvements of that nature included within this PUD. So that's roughly the overview of the proposal. I think the key thing is to understand what's happening with the plan. I'll be happy to answer any questions. We do have representatives here from the church and the agents that are handling this case.
Questions for staff? Mr. Richardson? Oh, go ahead.
I've got some questions regarding, the first one would be provision 6B. Which says that access controls shall be shown on the final plat and revised upon the PUD. I'm not quite sure what that means. Does that mean the PUD is going to override the plat?
No. I think the main issue on access had to do with access coming off of Douglas Circle through the residential development to the west. And that is going to be restricted to essentially emergency access only. I mean, pedestrian access will be available through there, but the plat itself, that's that, plus there are limited openings along Maple Street, and what was initially proposed that the Hope Street was going to be a private street, that now has been, as I understand, converted to a public street.
Well, along Maple Street, the PUD shows 3 openings there west of the pond.
Yes.
The plat shows 2. My concern is that with this language, whatever gets drawn on the PUD will override the plat.
Well, the intent will be it needs to be modified to the same thing. The intent was the platting process would set the number of openings along Maple.
Appreciate that. On Lot 2, one of my concerns is at the north end, we're allowing 65 feet of height, which will be within about 200 feet of those single-family residences. Was there been any discussion about, it's labeled fourplexes, but we're going to allow 65 feet. So I'm a little concerned about the height at the far north end. It says all of Lot 2 can have 65 feet.
That historically, as I understand it, has been usually the standard. The height restrictions kind of go to the highest allowed in there, and I think the envision based on the plan is that you're dealing with the apartment, multi-story apartment building that would be in here. These are all intended, as I understand, to be single-story. Now, I don't know if you want to require that those be further labeled to be only single story. I guess that's within your purview to be able to do that, to restrict that height to only the multi-story units. And I don't know whether any of these around on the south side of the pond that are in Reserve A are intended to be all multi-story. I do believe these two units are, but back up in here, I don't think they.
Well, maybe we have some comment from the applicant on that. I'd like to see that limited in some way. I understand on the apartments, but you know, within that close to those others, I think 65 feet's too high right there. So, Matt, you know, we don't. I'm assuming we're not limited to one height within a lot. We can designate different heights within a lot.
We can do that. I think we have the latitude to pick that.
Okay.
I mean, the whole idea of the PUD is to create, if you will, whatever kind of rules and standards you want to apply to this property. Otherwise, the underlying zoning, historically, this is SF5, would be applying. They're asking for a height, more height, and I believe it's with these structures. The stated intent coming through in the dialogue, as I understand, in their communications with the neighbors, has been to try to build structures around the outer perimeter on the north and west side that were compatible with the single-family homes around it. And it probably would make some sense to try to further tighten that down within the PUD so it's understood going forward.
Right.
Same way.
Was there any discussion about the 50-foot light poles on the athletic field at the DAB?
Yeah, there was. It was our understanding that the lighting of those posts is going to be pretty limited, and the current standards on lighting would be such that they're not going to be something that would be glaring. They have to be targeted, aimed down, shielded accordingly. That's what the current regulations within everything will apply, irrespective, and particularly if they, you know, if the west side of the field becomes lit, they've got to be very sensitive to that because you've got single family immediately west of it.
Yeah, that's my concern. And it does say they're going to shut these off at 10 o'clock, which I think is important because at 50 feet, you can do all the shielding you want to, but you'll have bleed over into that single family.
I'm aware.
You can read a paper in the backyard along that fence, no matter how much shielding you do there. So I think the cutoff time is really important here. Not to mention the loudspeakers and other things.
If there's further language that you feel needs to be tweaked in here,
well, I don't know what
encourage
to do.
you guys
Yeah.
to
I don't know how
add
you do that except lower the light poles, and that doesn't work very well for athletic fields. So, I get that. I mean, a 20-foot pole on an athletic field doesn't do much unless you have a whole lot of them and aimed at directions you don't want them aimed. So that's all my comments.
Any other questions for the presenter? Mr. Foster?
Dave, I just want to clarify on the general provisions for Lot 1. It says there'd be a maximum of 80 dwelling units. And you go over and look at the diagram, and it's got 26 potential units. I just want to make sure I understood, though. The number, it could have a potential of 80 units. Is that correct?
Yeah, I didn't catch all of what your question was.
I just want to confirm that it states in the provisions that it could have a maximum of 80 dwelling units, but yet we're looking at a diagram that shows 26.
Which lot are you talking about, David?
Lot 1. I just think it's important to be aware of that. Then the second item is, if you go on down in the provisions, item number 4, where it references access, when the subdivision committee looked at that, that control of that only being emergency access now provides for pedestrian access there, so that would need to be updated.
Mr. Foster, we have a clarification here by Mr. Miller.
The text is what would control. The diagram is just illustrative, but.
Well, I understand that, but people rely on the diagram is the problem.
Well, but I mean, I guess if it came down to staff, we're gonna go by what the text says.
So
I understand.
Basically, you're pointing that out for the audience.
Yes. Dave, did that make sense on the access that being also pedestrian as well?
Well, in our initial review, we didn't have any heartburn over what this was saying. I'm aware that that issue became a point in the plat, and the plat was revised to show that that point off of Douglas Circle was also going to be available for pedestrian access. So, and then there's kind of a general ability to flow across all this stuff. With no walls, how are you going to see it?
I'm assuming that the plat is going to take precedence.
I don't think there's a problem.
Plat would take precedence over the wording on the provisions.
If they platted an access easement or a pedestrian easement, that would certainly, there's no way you could remove that without a vacation.
Yeah.
Mr. Blake?
This might not be a concern, but it's just observation. I don't know if it's a concern or not, but I noticed the northeast corner is the Wichita Valley Center. Is there any input from that board or committee over that, if there's any concerns or not that came up about?
We've heard nothing from him regarding the plat or this development. So I've not gone out of my way to pursue that, but no.
Okay, I was just wondering that.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, would the agent or applicant like to make a comment? You have 10 minutes for presentation.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Chris Baum from Garver, 924 North Main here in Wichita, Kansas. With me is Greg Tice with Spangenberg Phillips Tice. Your address?
121 North Mead, Wichita, Kansas.
And we both wanted to come up and speak a little bit. I can speak to a couple of items. Mr. Tice can speak to some of the others. I believe it was the intent that on the 65-foot building limitation that was mentioned earlier, that was for the multi-story buildings that were situated further to the east and to the north of the site. And I'm assuming if there's clarification you want to define that, we'd be open to that idea. The other issue was the pedestrian access, and there was discussion about just allowing blanket pedestrian access through the facility. So without any prescriptive, on the PUD at least, any prescriptive requirements for allowing pedestrian access. The 50-foot light poles were discussed at the DAB, and again, to your point, you need them to light a field, but the hours of operation had been discussed, and the church was sensitive to the needs of the neighbors and wanted to make it be a good neighbor and get the lights off at a decent hour, which I believe was 10 p.m. maximum. And I think that hit the points that I wanted to make. And Greg, if you wanted to have a couple of comments architecturally speaking.
Yeah, we have no problem. This is the only area that would be multi-story. And if we wanted to further define that as far as having some line across this area that defines where that height restriction is acceptable, that's fine with us. The only reason there is the number of units shown that's possible is we just took the area times the 22 units per acre to determine that. But if that wants to be further reduced, because this is all going to be pretty low density, single family, basically patio homes and duplexes and fourplexes, that's not going to be an issue either. The architectural control language that I presented and has talked to Dave and staff about is that, as Dave mentioned, the intent of this development is to have different building types that do not all want to have the same architectural building materials. And so the original language talked about having similar building materials and colors. The intent is the event center, which for the record is not going to be a nightclub and is only intended to be serviceable for weddings and maybe business events. And so but there was the original barn, the Mises, the church bought this from the Mies family, and there was a barn on here that the Mies family had, and they wanted to possibly recreate a barn like that, kind of historically speaking. And so that, along with the school, there's a chapel, and there's also the potential for some retail that we just wanted the flexibility. So we asked that the staff would talk to the church building committee or designee that they would just all work together honor the intent of the PUD.
Mr. Tice, is the architectural character going to be more in line with the red barn or the church?
Actually, that barn was white, and
somebody said red.
But more in line with the church.
Thank you. Any questions for the presenters?
I just would like to say one more thing, and that is staff really worked so well with us through this whole process. I just want to commend them. From Dale Miller and Dave Yearout, Neil Strahl through the planning, everybody really helped us come to consensus on this, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Anybody from the applicant like to
Joe,
speak?
Joe, I got a question. I got a comment.
They still got some time. Yeah. Is the applicant?
I got a question for the applicant.
Yes, sir.
Okay, no one wants to speak from the owner standpoint? I understand. Okay, now we have a question, Mr. Richardson.
Question for these guys. So we could, for the building heights, we could perhaps call out those two large buildings at 65 feet and simply make the others 30 feet, which is the same as the lot one around the outside. That's what I would suggest. Instead of saying one story, let's leave it at 30 feet, which allows you the flexibility for 2 stories if that might work out. So if we could have the staff work with them on that language, I think that'd be good.
So are you saying that we would draw basically a line across this area right here and say anything in that area can be
someplace
that height?
like right. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Thank you.
Mr. Blick?
Question with that on that same question with the parking lot that's on that northeast corner. Is it gonna drain into the retention pond, or is it just gonna flow off into behind it somewhere?
Yeah, we can't drain anything back towards the big ditch.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Mr. McKay.
Chris, would you guys be opposed to actually giving a legal description of the 65-foot area there where the deals, rather than just to say
That would be fine. We could define, Mr. McKay, we could actually add dimensions on the PUD that called that out if you wish.
I think that's what needs to be done, because you're still wide open if you say where the multifamily is at and would know where it's gonna be, so.
And Mr. McCabe, actually what I was going to suggest possibly is creating a parcel 2A and add that restriction to 2A and let the rest of it be. Because parcel 1 right now has got a 30-foot height restriction, which is around the north and west side. So we could do that.
If they're willing to work with you.
Yeah.
Good suggestion.
We can tweak that accordingly, yes.
Any other questions? Okay, see.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Miller has a comment.
Just before you guys sit down, just from staff standpoint on the architectural language, where it says that we would be, the intent of the PUD, as I understand it, what it would be in my mind is that the residential stuff would have similar architectural characteristic, but all the commercial stuff to the south would be its own thing. Is that what we mean by that?
Well, it means that, you know, the event center may look like a barn. The houses may have different character than what's up front, but then there's also the school that, I mean, the reason I was so broad in the material description is the school may have architectural metal panels on it, but we won't have that on the chapel. And the chapel may have a slate roof, but not a composition.
Right, that's what I mean, is the stuff that's not residential would have, each building could be its own thing, but the residential stuff would have some similar, yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, for that clarification. Okay. Anybody in the audience that'd like to speak on this? Come forward, state your name and address.
Teresa Miller, 6421 West Renee, Wichita, 67212. Basically, the top north is my backyard. That's where I live. And I respect the limitation of the 65 feet over here on the apartment the apartment complex. My concern is not limiting the ones around the perimeter to a single dwelling. Well, it's just my concern as a person living back there, just because, you know, we live where we live because of what was there when we came, but I don't know, and I'm not good with that thing. So these are these single?
You need to go back to the podium, please, and
Are those?
use the mouse.
Are
And if you can't use it, we'll let Dave show you how.
okay. So are these all single dwelling right here? Okay, so then the ones back here, are those like fourplexes?
Greg, could you go to the podium to answer the question? I guess.
And then would those be taller than?
No, the intent, okay, I probably need to speak to
Okay.
that. The intent that is that there will be fourplexes probably in this area. These will be more patio homes / duplexes, maybe fourplexes as well. Hasn't been determined yet. But all of it will be single story. And we tried to, the reason we separated this area right here, this lot 1 from lot 2, is specifically so we had a lower building height. And I think we did, I think, 35 feet or 30 feet on there just for that reason. So there wouldn't be any 2-story buildings in here.
Along the perimeter.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Greg. Continue.
And that's all I had, is just the concern about what's around the perimeter of Willow-esque, basically.
Thank you.
A comment for
Mr. Richardson.
Ma'am, there's looks like there are on your street some 2-story buildings, 2-story houses. Is that right? On Renee Street.
There may be 2.
So again, these would not be any higher than that. So I think that's the intent of the 30 feet maximum height.
Okay, anyone else from the audience? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, sir.
I appreciate you letting me speak. Wasn't on the agenda, so I didn't think I could do that. My main concern.
Please state your name and address.
Oh, I'm sorry. Glenn Shore, 108 North Willow-esque. And I had the concern that the lady before me had. The other concern I had, I'm amazed that nobody's even talked about the effect of all this on Maple Street and just the traffic that goes through there. And I say that partially because of the construction that's gone on in that intersection, 235 and Kellogg. Back when there was a lot more closing of the streets, traffic was terrible. And of course, this adds to it a lot. So I don't know whether there's anything concerning from here on the traffic, but it's a concern to mine.
Okay, anyone else from the audience like to speak? Okay, go ahead. State your name and address.
My name is Joan Flynn. I live at 6719 Laconia Circle, 67209 here in Wichita. One of my concerns is, and this was brought up also, we bought our homes knowing that there was that empty lot and knowing that it was quiet and knowing that I mean, I've been there 25 years and there's nothing been built on it. So you assume, and I know we shouldn't assume, but we do, we assume that it's going to stay an empty lot. So my concern is what this is going to do to our property values in Willow-esque. Nope, that's it.
Foster, do you have a question?
Ma'am, if you'd stay at the podium, please, for my question.
You stay at the podium.
I think you're the right person to ask this question. I've written and made notes here about a concern for noise, and I'm surprised. I suspect that came up from the DAB, but, you know, soccer games, amphitheater, school, and all that, there's going to be a lot of noise.
Not a fan.
And has there been discussion on that? What are the concerns?
I don't know about other neighbors, so I can't really speak to them. I can only speak to my husband and I. We don't back up right to that field, but we're not that far off. We're probably less than a block from that empty field. And I'm very concerned about light, noise, even with just the church being over there. They every once in a great while light it up like a Christmas tree, and it's annoying. And maybe I'm being selfish, but it's annoying. And when I hear that there's going to be a sports field and that there's going to be an amphitheater, I was reading in the handout that I got that the amphitheater would close at midnight. Gosh, you know, we have kids in that neighborhood that don't stay up till midnight. And I am very concerned about the noise. Right now, the church is quiet. And I can't say much more than that. The church is quiet. I know they have lots and lots of events, but they all take place inside the building. So, I mean, they have wonderful Christmas events. They're all inside the building. I'm sure they're noisy. I'm sure they, you know, but they're inside. So when I'm hearing amphitheater, I'm not a fan. When I'm hearing sports field, not a fan. Hence my property value. What is that going to do to that? The school actually causes me less concern, because at least it's only open during the day and not on the weekends, and thank goodness they're not there in the summer. So, so I'm back to the property values.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, anyone else like to speak? No, just a minute, Greg. Anyone else want to speak? Okay. The agent applicant has a rebuttal period of 3 minutes. 2 minutes. How can we put 3 up there? And I'm taking 10 minutes off because you already answered some of the question. 10 seconds.
10 seconds, okay. A couple of things. We did have a meeting with a neighborhood, and the intent is the church is going to be good neighbors and have always been, in their opinion, good neighbors. And so this field and this school will start out as K-8, and the idea is that K-8 schools do not have late sporting events and probably will not have that field lighted even to begin with. So that's something that may or may not happen in the future. As far as the property values, and can't really speak to that issue. The one other comment I wanted to make was we had asked for a 25-foot sign. It's not a huge deal to us, so if that doesn't happen, I'm sure we can design a prominent sign that's only 20 foot tall. So. Oh, and regarding the traffic, there was a traffic study completed for the site. It showed that the impact of our initial development that we're going to start with does not have an impact on adding more traffic. As we go along, we are going to add acceleration and deceleration lanes on the streets to help the traffic flow along Maple.
And I'll just add to that, this is Chris Bohm again from Garver. That traffic study and that information was heard during the subdivision part of this. So any concerns, well, the concerns would have been brought up at the subdivision, but there was a traffic study commissioned by the church too.
I don't think we had access to that at the subdivision committee. I don't believe. And I'd have a general question here for the staff is, when is it appropriate to have traffic studies? Because we're saying this would be done after the whole thing's approved, after it's gone, and we've already had the plating process, so we're kind of down to, do we have traffic lights or not, aren't we? I mean,
I think there's a policy, I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but I believe it's basically triggered by the traffic engineer saying that the project is significant enough that it warrants a traffic study.
But how does that input into the plating process and the PUD? Because this is all going to be done before, I mean, I don't think anybody has seen the traffic study except for the staff. We did not see it in the subdivision committee.
I don't know, Dave, did you see it at all?
I did not see the traffic study. I presumed it went with the plat, and we got no comments from traffic as the plat came forward or on this, that it was a concern beyond what's already been reviewed.
Well, at the subdivision, they said we needed a traffic study, and there was one, and it was going to be provided, but they were having a hard time getting their hands on it. But I don't, so again, I have a sort of a general question, even beyond this project, is who looks at traffic studies and when do they happen? Because normally we get these late in the game that says this is going to be approved subject to a traffic study, which implies that there'll be no changes because of the traffic study.
Well, and that may be something the planning commission wants to look at, but for example, the, we've, on the east side of town, there at Rock and 21st,
right.
The commission has required the apartment developers there to do a traffic study, but only as part of their building permit. So the zoning was approved without it. Other times we try and get it on the front end. I think it varies at this point.
Practices have been across the board in every place I've ever worked across the state, and that which provides you no help. I understand that, but historically, those kinds of studies go with plat, and I think within the zoning regulations, when we're dealing with CUPs or with the PUD, if you feel it's warranted and triggered, something could be made available through that process. But historically, and I think even statutorily, it's more envisioned that those kinds of things are addressed at the planning stage because it's state law provides through the subdivision regulations the authority to require on-site and off-site improvements through the planning process. So that's historically where those things have occurred. I'm taking at face value that a traffic study has been developed. We have heard nothing from traffic that with red flags saying, whoa, 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 we've got problems here. So I'm not sure at this stage what else we can have.
I'm not sure traffic has had a chance to review the study either. Maybe they have. And again, if we look at the plating process, the traffic study says we need XL, decel lanes, and you get into the issue, do we have enough right-of-way to do those kinds of things, it seems to me ought to be addressed earlier in the game rather than later. And I understand you may not want to do a traffic study if it's not going to get approved. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing, but
I mean, we do send the PUDs and CUPs to the traffic engineer for them to review and provide input back as part of our staff report. And typically, I guess the way it's been going historically is if they have a concern, they let us know, but if they don't, then we don't ever hear anything.
And as I recall, just as the case with the Dale side of the case that we'll hear again, the Chelsea Station case near 21st and Rock, one of the administrative actions that will happen irrespective is if the traffic engineer, and this is I understand by ordinance, the traffic engineer evaluates the traffic study, determines that there are improvements that are warranted, it's mandatory that the developers provide those improvements before they're getting permits to move forward anyway. So, and I realize this commission may not be intimately involved in the review of all that stuff, but there are folks within the city that are responsible to deal with that and don't let that stuff fall off the table.
Well, I guess I'd just like to say, I mean, we got all of the city staff at subdivision, and they say any more comments, and they either have comments or don't have comments. If they don't have comments, apparently, whether it's stormwater or whether it's traffic or whoever, apparently they're on board with what's going on. So I got to rely on them being the professionals unless something is flagged that's not working and they request something else.
well, I think in this case, they said we'll need to see a traffic study, but we don't have it yet. Everybody said there was one, but it had not been
I guess
provided.
I guess I don't know if I seen it, if I knew what the hell I was looking at, so. I still gotta rely on the
Well,
professionals.
even the staff said they had not seen it. The staff said they had not seen it, to include traffic
How
engineering
many weeks ago was that?
last week.
We heard the subdivision on this one?
Yeah.
And he's not here today, and we
Right.
had, permit people, we had fire department, we had everybody, so he could have been welcome to be back if he didn't have what he needed.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission.
I'd like to make a motion we approve subject to staff comments with one exception. The multifamily be separated out with the restrictions on the heights.
Second. The architectural control changes.
Provision 11. What? Revision to provision 11.
And staff's okay with that revised
Okay, fine,
language.
including revision 11.
What about the height on the sign?
Is they're okay with it? 20 feet?
Okay, all right.
Any, who second? Mr. Dool seconded, Mr. McKay's first, and now we're gonna have discussion. Mr. Foster.
Dave, this question is for you. I still want to come back to the noise issue. West of here, over on, let's see, where you have the Target, and there's an elementary school right near that. There's a nice barrier of evergreens that's been installed, and it's a two-way thing of buffering or screening, you know, to provide, frankly, some safety for the kids from whatever development occurs. My question is, if you, first looking at this, you'd think if it's going to follow the landscape ordinance, it would require solid screening along there. And so, frankly, that's what I assumed was going to be there, either a wall or a fence of some sort. And then I was going to say, well, if you follow the landscape ordinance and you've only got one tree every 40 feet, if you've got that screening, it really doesn't do much to buffer or benefit that issue of concern for neighbors. And even if you do no solid screening, you get one tree per 30 feet and 5 shrubs along there per 30 feet. Now, the shrubs typically die, so you're not going to get much benefit in terms of buffering. My question is, in the course of this, are you comfortable that the idea is for this to be open flow back and forth between the two neighborhoods? That the screening is really not an issue? That's my question.
Well, if you're directing it to me, my answer would be yes. I've got to take at face value that the church met with the neighborhood to the west, and the conclusion between a consensus between the church and the neighborhood was they did not want solid screening. They did not want that to be anything except open. Within the latitude of the PUD, we have the ability to basically set those standards, and that's what's being proposed here. So I understand that, that historically we've tried to create those kind of screening buffers between more intensive developments and single-family developments that exist, but one size fits all doesn't always work, and that's what we're hearing here. So in terms of a direct question, yes, I'm comfortable with it as proposed. I do not see a problem. Now, will that mean somebody may come back later and say, gee, I wish? Well, the other side of the coin, if you will, would be, well, if you've got a property owner on the west side that wants a solid buffer, they can put one up on their property. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not being proposed here, and we've not heard back from anybody saying, no, we want that back in there at all. So I'm comfortable with it.
Mr. Warren.
Now, the motion as presented was for a 20-foot limit on the signage. Is that correct?
The staff recommendation.
I would, my thinking on that is, from a traffic standpoint, a bigger sign is easier to read, less likely someone's gonna be slamming on the brakes when they're coming in. So I would make a substitute motion, basically as presented, except that with the provision that the sign would be allowed to go to 25 foot.
Might go higher.
Go from 20 foot to 25 foot.
I'd second that.
Or you can amend the one that we accept the amendment.
Will you accept the amendment? Is that okay if we
Yeah,
just,
that'd be fine.
will the second accept the
Yes.
amendment? I think it was Mr. Dool. Okay, any more discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. I'd just like to compliment the applicant. I think it's a very progressive, conservative development. They'll be much appreciated on West Maple. Thank you. And with that, is there anything else to come before us?
No, sir.
Yeah, we got a question. Ms. Miller-Stevens?
They had copies of the zoning hearing outside, and I just picked it up and scanned over it quickly. And item where it gives the procedure, it says public speaks, applicant speaks 10 minutes and public speaks 3 minutes. It said may be extended by vote of the commission. Did we not change that to where the chairman?
And we're working on that.
Okay.
Anything else? We're adjourned.